Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Good afternoon to all our viewers and welcome on Youth Matters on Hidayat TV. With me, your host, Sakina Habib. So today's program, we're going to be discussing about almost everything that's happening over the news right now, meaning the latest headlines. So we're going to be having a navigating discourse on what's happening in Palestine, in Lebanon, as well as in Israel. And also, breaking news: 159 countries are preparing to adopt the BRICS new payment system, signaling a major shift in the global financial landscape. And this payment system developed by the BRICS nations is being seen as a direct challenge to the dominance of the US dollar and in international trade and finance as well. So now, by adopting this new payment system, these 159 countries are seeking to create a more balanced and multipolar financial world, reducing reliance of traditional Western-led financial institutions such as the SWIFT system. Now, the big question here is that will this new system disrupt global financial markets, and how will the U.S. Dollar and other Western power? How will the U.S. and other Western powers respond to this situation? So, what do you think? Could this be a start of a new financial order? Drop your comments and do let us know. Moving on towards our fundamental discussion on today's program, I will be joined by very well esteemed and distinguished guests on my program. Two important, very guests. I have with me Dr. Marcus Papadopoulos and Sister Sakina Datu. Dr. Marcus is a very well known historian, author, and also a political analyst. And Sister Sakina Datu is a journalist, a producer, as well as an author and a broadcaster. So, without much further ado, I would like to welcome both my guests on board. Hello, good afternoon to you both. Thank you so much for joining me on Youth Matters today. Hope you're both doing well.
It's a pleasure to be.
So today's discussion is obviously going to have probably different opinions from the both of you, or maybe we could be on the same page. And I really want to, navigate our discourse on what's taking place in Palestine right now, what's happening in Lebanon, what's happening in Israel, and also when it comes to the world leaders, what is their response? So I would like to start off with my first question to Dr. Marcus. From a political perspective, the way they are telling the story every day on different news outlets, on different media stories, what they call the Israelis, what they call a national identity. Now, this national identity that they have been using is from their trauma of that day of October 7, 2023. And to date, they are using this as an excuse for the genocide. They've been assassinating all key figures of Hezbollah and Hamas, such as Syed Hassan Nasrallah, Ismail Haniyeh, Hashim Saifuddin very recently, and of course the Hamas leader Yahya Sinwar. So what is your response to these actions? How are you seeing it?
Well, first of all, let me say this. There are major questions surrounding the events of October the 7th, 2023. So, is it possible that Israeli intelligence failed to detect Hamas's intentions? Possible, but how probable? Is it possible that Israel's listening and surveillance systems failed to detect Hamas's movements? Again, possible, but how probable? Furthermore, is it possible that American and British intelligence and American and British listening and surveillance installations in West Asia and in the Eastern Mediterranean also failed to detect Hamas's objectives and intentions. Again, possible, but how probable? Suffice to say, what happened on October the 7th of 2023 is not a black and white matter. That said, however, I do believe, and I have been saying this on television ever since the aforementioned date, that Israel is using the events of October the 7th as a pretext to pursue a greater Israel. Now, a greater Israel would, of course, be at the expense of Palestine and at the expense of Lebanon and some other countries, but for the time being, it would be at the expense of the Lebanese and the Palestinians. Now, why would a greater Israel be advantageous to the Western ruling elites? Well, Israel is the main conduit for Western global influence and power in West Asia. Without Israel, there can be no Western dominance of West Asia. So, if Israel expands in territory, which means it will expand in power, this can only be good for the West. It can only be good for Western global supremacy of West Asia. That is a key reason as to why the Western ruling elites are indifferent to the mass murder of Palestinian civilians, including women and children, by the Israelis ever since October the 7th of 2023. Whatever the British ruling elite or the American ruling elite say in public concerning their so-called concern over Palestinian civilian casualties, in reality, they care nothing for the Palestinian people. But I do believe that it is also the case that whilst the American and British ruling elites care nothing for the Palestinian people, in private, they will be saying to the Israelis that by Israeli soldiers murdering Palestinian civilians in full view of the world and gloating about this, this is detrimental to the West's image in the world. And the West's image in the world rests on a myth, a facade, that the West is the guardian of human rights in the world, as well as being the guardian of democracy and freedom and civilization. So I have no doubt that in private, the Americans and the British are saying to the Israelis, keep on murdering Palestinian civilians, but do it in private and do not own up to it. So I think when it comes to Gaza, the Israeli intention is to capture all of that piece of Palestine and then to either expel all or most of the Palestinians living there. And when it comes to Lebanon, again, their intention is to capture the southernmost areas of Lebanon. But all is not going well for the Israelis. The Israeli military, whilst it remains formidable, is bogged down in a brutal hand-to-hand conflict in Gaza. And thus far, the Israeli military has not been able to break into Lebanon.
Absolutely. You've highlighted a good point that how it's not turning down well for the Israelis now, because we've been seeing on the news as well that how Iran is asking some of the Israeli settlers to move out from the southern Lebanon at this point, where they want to, they've been living in their tents and relocating and everything, and because these areas are now becoming a source of an activity place for the perpetrators, and so they're misusing these locations now as their what do you say, as their air bases, like as their bases, sorry, as their bases to attack people. So yes, this is a point that you've mentioned, right? Also, Sakina, I would like to move on to you. What are your comments? What are your viewpoints regarding this? That the Israeli government always likes to, frame everything, that is happening now as a response to October 7th, and this is a pre-existing agenda. The settler movement that Ben Gvir and other key figures wanted to always have to, depopulate Gaza. They've always wanted, this greater Israel, because they always believed in this so-called greater Israel. So Netanyahu also believes in the same thing, since part of their coalition agreement dating back to 2022, that they want the whole thing, including the West Bank. The occupation is growing day by day and willing to invade much more. Now they've even started Lebanon, and they're going to continue. They're planning to basically continue and expand as much as possible. So what are your views about this narrative?
So I think there's a lot of things to unpack there. So to start with, of course, things did not start on October 7th. In fact, we say to 75 years of occupation, but even before that, this idea of a greater Israel existed even before the Balfour Declaration was actually put in place. Because the whole idea of the Zionism, the concept of Zionism started well before even World War I, whereby, they had this wanting to actually establish a Jewish state. And you have to remember that this was Palestine was under an Ottoman Empire, and then it was entrusted, it was under the occupation actually of the British Empire, and then the British Empire handed it over to Israel. So the problem started well before October 7th. I mean, we can go into history as far back to look at it. Now, first of all, the in the Western media and in the Western narrative, of course, there's a lot of confusion. And before October 7th, to be honest, I used to find it almost impossible to have any kind of a serious debate with people who did not agree with our narrative. And that is because, there was so much propaganda that existed, and because people did not understand how far back this problem is, that people could not even debate it really genuinely. And they just said, oh, you can go, you can talk about this land belonging to Jews way before, during the time of Prophet Musa. And now, I think now, I see it as a very positive thing that we can actually have these debates. People are reading, they are looking at, the conflict in its historical sense. So yes, there is a narrative that is pushed out by the Western media. Obviously, Western media is fully supportive of the Zionist entity. So that is the narrative they are pushing. However, I think that I see that the world is really starting to. We are not complacent because this narrative is being pushed all the time. However, I think people are beginning to really understand the fact that this did not start on October 7th. So to expand a little bit on that, even when there was a partitioning, the UN partition and said, okay, two states, Palestine and Israel, which to start with is not even acceptable. You go to someone's house and you take up, you go there by force, and then you say, okay, we'll give you back 45%, we'll take the rest. So that has a problem in itself. But even if we were to say that, okay, fine, the UN decided, to partition two nations, even after that, Palestine has never been free, because everything in Palestine is controlled by Israel. If you look at all the facilities, like the electricity, water supply, the borders, we know that, for example, Gaza is been an open air prison for a long time. People don't have freedom of movement. So that cannot be called You cannot say there were two states anyway before October 7th, so that, this problem started on October 7th. People have been in occupation for a long time. Now, when it comes to the issue of settlements, again, Israel has been going against the very UN that established the state of Israel in 1945. Still, they encroached. I mean, they were illegal. According to UN, all these settlements are illegal. And yet, nobody takes any notice of that. They continue to take on more and more land per day. So, what happened in October 7th, it was just a frustration of a people who literally are under occupation, not just under occupation, but constantly being subjected. Now the world's eyes are upon Palestine. We are seeing all these atrocities, but the atrocities were happening way before October 7th. People were being killed, for fun. At the checkpoints, people were just being shot. Israel could invade anyone's house at any time, take men and take them to prison. So all these, oppression was going on prior to October 7th. In my view, what really has changed is that the world had closed its eyes, and as we are aware, Abrahamic codes were being put in place, which would ensure that the Arab countries and Muslim countries surrounding Palestine would accept Israel and have bilateral relations with them. And I think this was a breaking point for Palestinians, because they felt like, they had been forgotten. And October 7th happened to kind of remind people that here we are and we are under occupation. And it has been successful because the Abrahamic codes have not proceeded. The world's eyes have opened. So I think in that context, if you look at it, October 7th is a sore point for Israel, and they will keep on crying about it. But in reality, when you study the history of what has been happening all along, October 7th was just one of those days, when in the history of the entire resistance movement, to be honest.
Absolutely, you're right. And I think the question over here now arises that what's going to happen in the Middle East area, in the Middle East regions, because the concentration of Israel is on these 5 Middle Eastern countries all the time. It's always attacking and bombarding, and as you said, they have crossed their limits, and this has not just been happening from October 7th. This has been going on from a very long time. So Dr. Marcus, what is your viewpoint on this, and especially the fact that we're seeing how they're readily assassinating such key figures? I mean, these are such important figures, such as the leader of Hezbollah and of Hamas. Recently, we saw how they assassinated Yahya Sinwar very openly. I mean, there was no military or any sort of intelligence that was used. So what are your comments on this?
Regrettably, no action will be taken against Israel. As we all know, ever since 1948, the Israelis have been persecuting the Palestinian people, have been murdering the Palestinian people, have been imprisoning the Palestinian people, have been humiliating the Palestinian people. And I want to add, for the sake of Western audiences, that the Israeli persecution of Palestinians does not just include Palestinians who are Muslim. It also includes Palestinians who are Christian. It is very apparent to me that many people in the Western world, be it ordinary people and commentators, or I should say so-called commentators, are of the view that there are no Christians in Palestine. Well, there are many Christians in Palestine. There are many Christians in Syria. There are many Christians in Lebanon. And quite frankly, if you ask the opinion of Catholic or Orthodox priests in the Holy Land or in Syria, for example, regarding their opinion of Israel, it will be overwhelmingly negative, overwhelmingly hostile. But alas, that all said, Israel will continue to keep pursuing its murderous policy against the Palestinians, against the Lebanese, and against the Syrian peoples. And that is a testament to the enormous, enormous power that the Israel lobby wields in both America and Britain. Now, I do not believe that there will be a major war in West Asia. There are a lot of people who I believe are either hysterical or excitable, saying that soon America and Iran will go to war. Well, that will not happen, and I will say why that will not happen. The Israelis, by taking the course of action they are in Lebanon, are attempting to provoke Iran into unleashing a full conventional war against Israel, though such a war would be unusual given that Israel and Iran do not share a border and there is a lot of distance between the two countries. But nonetheless, the Israelis are trying to provoke the Iranians into taking a sustained military course of action. And by that, the Israelis are hoping that the Americans would be compelled to come to Israel's aid and to go to war against Iran. But the Americans are very well aware of what their Israeli friends and allies are attempting to do. And it is not in the interests of America to go to war with Iran. It is not in the interests of American interests in the Middle East for there to be a war between America and Iran. Yes, the Americans would like to see the overthrow of the Iranian government. They would like to see the destruction of the Iranian revolution. If there was a chance of a coup in Tehran against the Iranian government, then of course the Americans would support that. But that is quite different to America going to war with Iran. And the Americans and the Iranians do communicate with each other, sometimes directly, sometimes indirectly. And I applaud that. That is good because that is playing a major role in preventing a war, a major, major war from breaking out in West Asia. The Americans, being a military superpower, could defeat the Iranian military. Of course, naturally, that's nothing to be ashamed of if you are Iranian. But the American military can only be defeated by the Russian military. But still, there would be a lot of American casualties in a war with Iran, and more so, American interests, American bases in the Persian Gulf, on the Arabian Peninsula, would be seriously struck by Iranian forces, Iranian missiles, for example. So that is why there will not be a war between America and Iran, and we should be thankful for that. As regards to Israel, the Israelis will keep on doing what they are doing. You can boycott shops in the Western world which support Israel. You can organize however many protests you want at universities or in capital cities around the world. That will not deter the Israelis. The only thing which will deter the Israelis would be if the Americans said to them that the unconditional support from America to Israel will end if you do not pull back from Gaza, if you do not pull back from attacking Lebanon. As long as the Israelis have a blank check of support from the Americans, which they have had since 1948, they will continue doing what they are doing. That is extremely sad. That is extremely heartbreaking, but that is realpolitik.
Absolutely. I mean, we've been seeing this, and it's really surprising that every time the world leaders, they, do come up and, they're, I don't know if it's lip serving or what it is, but every time they do say that, Israel, you have to stop. And, but still, it's like they don't listen. And, they keep continuing with this murderous policy of theirs. In fact, even recently, this past week, Israel did not even spare the UN staff in Gaza and Lebanon as well, and it attacked several members at the UNRWA. So this also, completely put a halt to the critical food and medicine supplies into Gaza. So, Sister Sakina, what do you think, are we seeing here? And why is it that the UN feels so futile and hopeless? Why do they not have that importance, to play? Why are they not playing their role over here?
So the UN is called United Nations. It's supposed to bring in the nations of the world together. Apparently, everyone having the say, and equal, but it is not. We know that, the UN is controlled by the West. The five permanent members have got the veto power, and America has used this veto power every single time when it comes to Israel. So it is really, quite toothless. It does not have any power at all. It's absolute. This past 1 year has shown that UN has become absolutely, useless, really. So there are two ways, I think, in my view. One is now that the BRICS countries have formed, this alliance, they could be a reform of the UN by removing the veto powers. That is one option. Or at some point, UN will just simply cease to exist, and there will be a new system. As you can see, the amount of countries that have joined the BRICS is phenomenal. So in terms of, I think, the West, I think the West is digging its own grave, if I'm honest. Going to war, I think I would like to defer a little bit and say that I would not write off, a complete coming heads-on collision in the Middle East, because the West have got these arrogance, and there's two two different narratives. People have some people think that Israel is the one that controls America because of the amount of lobbying that goes on, the amount of money, as you can see in the presidential elections right now in the US. If you look at the amount of money that comes from Zionists for both parties, you realize that it is them really who choose who is in the capital, who's the president, and therefore there is payback by having to give unequivocal support to Israel, whatever that may be. However, I always think that actually it is the other way around. It is Israel is actually America's. It's being run by America, because America, Biden has said before that if there was no Israel, we would create Israel. And so this is actually there's a report that has come out that says that in the past 6 months, in the past 1 year, almost 6 months of it, half the year, Anthony Blinken has spent it in Israel. And every single major bombardment that has happened, he has okayed it. He was there actually in person and saying, yes, go ahead with this and go ahead with that. And that includes, according to the report, that includes him okaying the bombing of the aid trucks, that were entering Israel or Palestine. So I think, I don't believe that, there is a difference, that America is a different entity from Israel. However, I think there are major issues here. I think Iran's power, Iran is the only country at the moment that has stood up really to Israel. No one else has been able to. They have strongly stood up. The recent narrative has changed that Israel was retaliating against Iran, whereas it was not a retaliation. What Iran did was really a retaliation. This is a new attack by Israel in Iran, and I think they were shocked when they observed the ability of Iran and their being able to control all the missiles that came there. Their air defense system was far more superior than anyone would have known, because Iran never spoke about this. So I think now Iran, the major issue is, I do agree that they are trying to bring in Iran into a full-scale war. But Iran has been very strategic. It always is. It does not believe, like Israel, in bombing children, in bombing hospitals. So whenever they respond to Israel, we can see that they are very measured, and they only will target military targets. So I don't think that, they do want Iran to be irrational, to do something really silly, but Iran is not going to do that. I mean, we have seen it over. Iran has never started a war anywhere. In Lebanon, you talked about the resistance and the leaders of resistance being assassinated. These resistance, they have tons and tons of leaders in the waiting. When you remove one person, the resistance is a philosophy, is a concept. It's not based on individual people, and that all the leaders have got deputies and their deputies and their deputies ready to take over. In fact, in my view, I think Israel now regrets removing Sayyid Nasrullah and Yahya Sinwar and Ismail Haniya, because when these leaders were there, they knew they knew the philosophy or the tactic of what was happening. Now they don't know who's running Hamas. They don't know who's running Hezbollah, and it has become much more difficult for them, which is why you are seeing the amount of their soldiers being killed on the border with Lebanon.
Absolutely. In fact, the soldiers are even now refusing to go and fight anymore because they have lost so many of their own members. And so they're not willing to lose more. And as I even mentioned earlier, that, Iran doesn't always just attack with its ballistic missiles. As you said, it's very strategic. And even recently, they were asking these settlers to move out of southern Lebanon, who were basically living in these tents and trying to relocate. It was just like a gentle and a polite reminder, like, start moving out from here. You see, because as I said, like, the Israelis are again misusing those platforms to use it as their military air base to attack more people. So this is incorrect, of course. As you mentioned, I would like to move on to Dr. Marcus. Dr. Marcus, so Sister Sakina did mention about how we are seeing a beginning of an end of the Security Council veto power as well. Could you comment on this political take, and how could this navigate a global impact on some of the supreme leaders?
The concept of the United Nations is a sound one. It is an admirable concept. However, over many decades, the Western ruling elites who rule, not govern, rule the Western world, have penetrated the United Nations from top to bottom, from bottom to top. The United Nations is not performing the duties that it was supposed to be. We see that not just when it comes to international relations. We see the United Nations working hand in hand with various nefarious organizations in the world, such as the World Health Organization. So sadly, the United Nations is overall a failed organization. It has failed because it has been penetrated. But remember, the Western ruling elites could only have penetrated the United Nations because nations in all four corners of the world have been bribed. They have been bribed by the Western ruling elites. So that is something we should be mindful of. We should not be of the opinion that all of the countries in the world, aside from some Western countries or the Western ruling elites, wish to live in a free, democratic and peaceful and prosperous world, but they are not being allowed to. That's fantasy. That's just a fantastic way of looking at things. No, people have been bribed in the Christian world, in the Muslim world, in the Hindu world, and so on and so on. As regards the future of the United Nations, I don't believe it can be reformed, but it is possible that something could replace it, or something could emerge which rivals it. Now, could a new organization emerge from the BRICS? Well, that is possible, but remember, the BRICS is not a political bloc. It is an economic bloc. It is a trade and investment bloc. And there
Right.
are a lot of people commenting on the BRICS, and they don't really understand the finer details surrounding this. Yes, the BRICS is playing a major role. The BRICS constitutes a major catalyst in facilitating the arrival of a multipolar world. But, first of all, there will always be two superpowers, two military and nuclear superpowers, America and Russia. That is not going to change. Secondly, just because members of the BRICS are intensifying their trade with each other and have produced their own currency, all of those countries, with the exception of Russia, largely speaking, all of those countries have very close, very powerful trade and investment relationships with America and with Britain. The Chinese economic miracle is based overwhelmingly on its trade and investment relationship with America. That's not going to change. In 2022, trade between America and China was in the region of $800 billion. Trade between India and America is enormous. Trade between Brazil and America is enormous. Saudi Arabia is a strategic friend and ally of America. And also, whilst Israel is the main conduit for Western influence and power in West Asia, second to that is the Saudi conduit. So yes, the BRICS is a very interesting organization. It will help to usher in a multipolar world, but no one should be under the impression that those countries are going to neglect their economic relationships with America or with Britain. They will do no such thing whatsoever, because if the Chinese did that, or let me reword that, if there was to be a rupture in the trade relationship between America and China, that would spell enormous dire consequences for the American and Chinese economies, and more so for the Chinese economy. So again, the BRICS is a trading organization. Also, on top of that, there is suspicion, there is tension between certain BRIC countries. So, for example, there is major tension between India and China. There is also tension between Russia and China, though you are not seeing that at the moment. Yes, the relationship between Moscow and Beijing is at an all-time high. It is unprecedented. It is yielding very substantial results, positive results for the Russians and the Chinese. But the Russians are very well aware of how entwined the Chinese and American economies are, and America is an enemy of Russia's. Also, the border battles between the Soviet Union and China in the late 1960s have not been forgotten in the Kremlin. And on top of that, the Russians are aware that the Chinese One Belt, the Silk Route, could challenge Russia's Eurasian Union in Central Asia. People talk about the Americans challenging Russia in Central Asia. That was gone are those days. That was in the 1990s and for the 2000s. Today, if there is a country which can challenge, which can rival Russian supremacy in Central Asia, it comes from China. So again, the BRICS is a trading organization, but that doesn't mean that all of its members have a healthy relationship with each other. So that is something that we should all be very well aware of.
Thank you for that, Dr. Marcus. Sister Sakina, so as we've heard, The tensions are obviously going to be on a different scale, country to country. And in fact, people are saying that, it is surprising that the world is actually witnessing how, Putin is not alone. I mean, people thought that he would be alone, but actually, he's got, in fact, I mean, there are 13 nations who have officially become a part of BRICS, one including even Indonesia, according to some news outlets. So, including world leaders from the BRICS nations: Brazil, India, China, South Africa, and of course newer members like Ethiopia, Egypt, Iran, and UAE. What do you think? What impact are we going to expect in the economical, financial, and political landscape now?
I think I have slightly different views from Dr. Marcus. I think that BRICS is going to play much more than an economic role, because mind you, today the fact that America controls the political landscape around the world is because of its economic power. If it did not have that economic power, they wouldn't be able to control so much of the world. And I think the BRICS, it's the BRICS countries are going to control the geopolitical landscape. That is totally my belief. When we talk about, for example, the very start, during the summit, they mentioned that they were against a few things. This is what BRICS stood for. One of it is they do not believe in sanctions, and therefore, when countries don't agree, they don't believe in the concept of sanctioning each other. Now, sanctions is an economic issue, but it is entwined with politics. A lot of it is come to do with politics, and when you impose economic sanctions on someone you don't politically agree with. So I don't think personally that you can really remove these from each other. Also, there were talks of if you look at the BRICS, we're talking about de-dollarization basically over here. America's power, yes, it may be a very strong a partnership in terms of trade with China, and I believe that will continue in the shorter term. But in the longer term, I think American economy is already suffering hugely, and I think with the de-dollarization, American economy is only going to get worse. At the moment, their economy is really bad. They are just printing paper. And this is only possible because they control the global trade through the dollar. Now, when these countries start trading between themselves, fuel, for example, oil, when they start trading, in a different currency, it's going to massively affect the West. The West generally as a bloc itself is already going through severe economic problems. Here, in the UK, we see ourselves, we are literally having such difficult economic situations here, and at the same time, look at the amount of wars that for example the West is fighting. It's sending money to Israel, which is tons of money. It's sending money to Ukraine. It has given billions to Taiwan right now in order to keep China in check. At the end of the day, there isn't an unlimited amount of money. If you look at the citizens of both our countries, whether you're talking about US and you talk about UK, people are really suffering. We are actually in the news talking about children who are going to school without having had a single meal in a day. This is the situation of the common man. Homelessness is on the rise. Unemployment is on the rise. But what are the leadership of these countries doing? They are sending tons of this money to fight wars. At some point, this is all going to come to a collision, head-on collision. And I think, also the issue of, for example, the BDS, us boycotting, protesting, it may not be making a massive change in terms of stopping the war right now. But I do believe that these issues do make a big difference. We can see that it has affected the economy of Israel massively. And also the pressure, this war that we are fighting is not just the war that exists right now between Israel and, the rest of the Arab countries is not just fought on the ground. The bigger war is on a psychological, warfare. And this is where we come in when we are protesting and we are doing BDS. It is the narrative, it's the controlling of narrative, because when you allow Israel to control the narrative, you are giving legitimacy to what they are doing to people in Palestine. So I don't think that that's correct. I think that, fighting this psychological warfare is going to have an effect. And also about the countries of the world. Yes, I know a lot of countries like India, like Saudi Arabia, like, UAE. These are opportunistic countries, and they will side with wherever they see their interest is. However, these relationships with the West are not so strong that they cannot be broken. Mind you, these countries don't like the West. They don't love the West. They are with them because they're benefiting from them at the moment. And what makes BRICS, I think, quite different, and this is not to romanticize and say that everything is wonderful and, all these countries in BRICS are saints and they get along, no, there are issues, there are serious issues, but at the moment, coming together is because they do not like the West in the way it dictates to them. So even on cultural aspects, things like African countries. I come from Africa, and in Africa, you cannot receive Western aid today if you do not subscribe to their cultural issues such as, LGBTQ. You have to have these allowances in your legal framework in order to receive aid. So even though these countries are trading with the West, they don't love the West. In fact, at the moment, they despise the West. But they have to continue. So the moment there is an alternative, in my view, I think that we can see they've all joined BRICS because that is an alternative. So there may not be a change in the short term, but I think in the long run, BRICS, does offer a really different multipolar world, not just economically, but in my view, politically too, because I don't think you can ever remove politics from the economic equation.
Thank you very much, Sister Sakina, for that. And we've actually come almost towards the end of our program. I was actually enjoying this debate. And in fact, there was so much that we still want to unpack, right? I think, we should definitely have more upcoming conversations on this, because there is still so much that we want to dig in and we want to really understand. I want to thank the both of you. Thank you so much, Dr. Marcus, and thank you, Sister Sakina, for joining me on today's program and for your insightful viewpoints that both of you have highlighted on our current latest discussion for today and for the news headlines. Thank you. It was an honor.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Inshallah, we'll be catching you in our next program, in our upcoming episodes. So this was the news highlights for today, and hopefully this is a good insight in terms of what's really happening in terms of the BRICS summit, and also what's happening in terms of Palestine, Lebanon, and Israel. Thank you very much. This is your host, Sakina Habib. Please make sure to support and like today's program as much as possible. Thank you. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.